Hello, we are transmitting to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century. Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost. Whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you. This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 161.IS1901. Certificate number 43419. E.A. Wallis Budge.
Handbook for the recently diseased.
Deceased.
Deceased.
Rose, thank you for joining us on the Omnibus.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be virtually visiting the bunker, which I thought would have like more ductwork, more visible ductwork, more wet chains and things hanging like Nostromo
wet
style.
chains.
But yeah,
You have maybe a slightly different impression of what we do here. The wet chains, I don't know, would fit in. But yeah, when I originally acquired the bunker, one of the key elements was that it not have a really low ceiling. You know, I'm fairly...
Yeah. You're taller than average. So
yeah, and so a lot of houses built in this era, you know, you walk around like this, and so this was nice. It had enough room that there's ductwork. Let me tell you that if the cameras could point at the ceilings, you would see just tinfoil kind of coiled around things. But yeah, we're lucky it's out of shot.
it's bunker chic. It's got more colorful art than I expected it to have. But thank you.
Well, speaking of colorful art, it seems like you are broadcasting from a teenage girl's bedroom, or is that just your vibe?
Way. That's just my vibe. My vibe is all the books, all the yellow and blue, and all the plants, all of the plants. There are 75 plants in this house, and it's not a very big house. So
Bless you. And are any of you allergic? Is there an allergy issue at all?
No. And the cat that came with the house, thankfully, is not interested in digging in any of the plants. I did worry about that, like dragging in this giant fig and thinking, what is he going to do? Are we going to have him mistaking it for a litter box problem that you often get with cats? And we did not have that. So good job, cat.
And where are you joining us from?
I am joining you from Birmingham, England, original Birmingham, Ozzy Osbourne's Birmingham. Peace be upon him.
Birmingham.
Yes. That's how they say
Midlands.
it here. Yes.
And are you in the steel business? Do you roll steel?
Yes, I am. I'm constantly rolling steel. It's an obsession with me. I roll steel 12 hours a day, then I come home and water my plants. No, I am a freelance marketing consultant. Mostly do communications and copywriting. And knock on wood, I continue to have more work than I can handle this year, which is a good thing to have in the age of AI. So
right. I was going to say that in AI, I mean, everybody says the last thing that AI is going to take over is freelance marketing consulting.
Oh, yeah. We are SAFE.
How could a computer figure out how that worked?
No, yeah. There was a bit of a dip at the start of the year, and then I started to get a lot of... Our executive went hog wild on ChatGPT, and he's written 60 blog posts. Could you fix all of them so that compliance doesn't scream at us anymore?
Ooh.
So, yeah.
In Birmingham, do all houses come with cats?
No. This one I was renting from friends who had recently got a dog. Dog did not get along with cat. The children took a vote in that family, and they decided that the dog was more important at the time.
Children took a vote, and they left the cat.
I am so glad he doesn't understand English, this cat. I don't know. He's a big shiny idiot. But if he ever needed a kidney, I would find a way to make mine fit. That is how I feel about this cat, John. I've never been this stupid about a cat, but maybe that's just middle age. I don't know.
Well, we have a cat around here, not here in the bunker or really anywhere around here, but nearby, within a mile of here. And the cat is awful. It's the worst cat I've ever met.
Really?
And I've met terrible cats, although I've never had a terrible cat. My cats are always great cats. But this cat is just, every day I say, I know a farm where this cat can go live. I know them. They're friends. This cat can go live on a farm at any time.
This cat's personality issues would be put to good work on a farm, it sounds like. Yeah. Or in like an old bed and breakfast. Like I grew up, my parents ran a bed and breakfast in northeastern Pennsylvania when I was like 3 to 12. And we had a succession of semi-feral, horrible cats that were alternately trying to climb your body or trying to murder you. So, yeah, it's just...
So northeastern Pennsylvania, how, so close to the Delaware River?
Yes. Close enough that, when you're a teenager, days out on the river are a thing, but,
And I think of that whole area as having basically a bed and breakfast based economy, right?
It was a bed and breakfast based economy, and now it is a casino and bed and breakfast based economy. That is what the Poconos are nowadays. Yeah.
Right. So. I've seen The Sopranos. I know that transition.
Yeah, that's where they all went after he whatever happened to him at that restaurant.
So, Rose, as an expatriate, and do you call yourself an expatriate? Are you now committed to living in Blighty?
Whenever this episode goes out, I will have an active citizenship application with the Home Office. So I'm going to be careful what I say about Great Britain. Love it. Wonderful, wonderful place. Keir Starmer, underrated. They're obsessed with baked beans, but other than that, I love them.
For breakfast.
Baked beans for breakfast on toast with black pudding. I don't know. They're all still traumatized by wartime rationing. That's how I figure that went. But yeah, I am here for the foreseeable, I think. The kid downstairs, she's 16, she used to say, when I'm a grown-up, I want to live in America. And recently she stopped saying that for reasons. So we're staying here. But I've been here 20 years now. Like...
You've been there 20 years and you have not adopted even the slightest accent.
No, cast iron accent. Yeah.
And so are you admired for having, I know that in the UK, depending on where you are, like an American accent can still be kind of an exotic or, like an appreciated thing. Is that still true in your group?
That's definitely still true in the Midlands. I think you go to certain small tourist spots, like in Wales, for instance. I have traveled quite a bit in Wales, and what's she going to do? Is she going to come in here and try to force democracy on us? What's she going to do? But here, yeah. And when people hear me talk, they're kind of like, oh, have you been here long? Are you visiting? How long are you staying? And I'm just like, no, I have a house and...
and a cat.
And a cat and the tax numbers and rolling steel.
20 years. Wow.
Yeah.
So your daughter, your teenage daughter speaks with a Midlands accent.
She speaks mostly with an American accent, which is very funny. It's very shocking to people when I explain she is born and raised here. She has never lived anywhere else. Her dad is English. He doesn't have the Birmingham accent. He's from a bit further north. But yeah, she sounds like me. So wow. I don't know what that's about. Unless you ask her to clean something, and then it's, I can't, mother.
Oh, what?
So,
she gets posh? She turns posh?
She turns weirdly posh when you ask her to clean something. Go figure. So,
that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rose, what is your area of special knowledge? Your area, because there's so much stuff in the Omnibus Bunker already about product marketing. There's a whole wall.
I did. I was like, I have nothing to offer them from my niche. They've already covered everything. It's just, it's amazing. I mean, that their episode on SEO practices was Stunning.
It's tough. You want to get your stuff out there, and
Yeah.
how do you get up in the rankings? It's
How do you get up in the rankings? Well, I have recently acquired a hobby about not quite 2 years ago. I started an indie podcast called Books of All Time. So it's a podcast. I'm tackling classic lit in chronological order. Basically, I've set myself a giant reading list, starting with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I'm moving forward through time, like book by book by book. At the time of recording this, I've just finished 5th century Athens. So I've just got rid of Plato and all the plays and everything like that. I'm about to start with the Ramayana. So it's like going in order. Every entry gets one summary episode. This is who wrote it, or this is who we think wrote it, and this is what it's about. And then it gets a meta episode. And the meta episode can be like explaining religious practices or something. So, for instance, this summer I read Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus Rex is the way all the British classicists pronounce it. And then the meta episodes, I wrote about Sigmund Freud and the Oedipus complex and how he hoofed a lot of cocaine and dreamed that one up.
Oh, clever.
So for the first 3 meta episodes, which was Epic of Gilgamesh and then an ancient Egyptian poem called The Tale of Sinuha that I had never heard of until I was like putting the reading list together. And then the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I kept bumping into this guy over and over again.
Now, let me just ask you,
Yeah.
as you're compiling, you're like, I'm going to start a new podcast. I'm going to read the great books. The second one is one that no one's ever heard of.
It's one that no one's ever heard of that I thought people should hear of, because we don't have a lot of ancient Egyptian literature. We don't have a lot from it. We mostly have religious practices, and here's how much beer we paid the workers when we weren't whipping them. And
Copper exchange stuff.
yeah,
I know.
exactly. Yeah, you've heard all about the copper from the Assyrian side of things.
But you're as a marketer, one would think that you'd be like, I'm going to get the big names out there at first, to like bring in the, to really maximize the SEO, as we were saying.
Yeah, maximize the SEO. At that
You're
point,
like,
I was
let's get the story of Ganush or
Sinuha. He's a
Sinuha.
scribe who bugs out after the pharaoh is killed, and he runs away to Syria. And it's basically a zero to hero story. And he comes back to Egypt, like rich and powerful, but he is a good Egyptian. So he submits to the new pharaoh, and he gets to die in Egypt, which is what all good Egyptians want, apparently.
It had never occurred to me, but now that you say it like that, to get to die in Egypt, that feels like that's a very poetic end.
It's good. It's short. That helps. But also, one of the things I liked about it was that lots of scribes would have it painted on the walls of their tombs, or they'd have a copy of it buried with them. Like, we love this story. It's kind of like some guy being buried in like an Arsenal Football Club coffin or something like that. Like, it had that kind of feeling to me. So, yeah.
Okay, so you run into this guy.
Yeah. This guy, he's an Egyptologist. He's probably the Egyptologist. He kind of reminds me of, Indiana Jones' buddy Marcus Brody.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Yes. So he's Durham Elliott's character. He's like the bumbling dean of the college where Indiana Jones works. But this guy is like a slightly evil version of that character. He's very learned, very physically unprepossessing, but he became one of the greatest plunderers that ever worked for the British Museum. I read a statistics, and I should introduce this guy. He has several names, actually, probably way too many names. In fact, he eventually gets rid of one of them. His name is Ernest Alfred Thompson Wallis Budge. And
Ernest Alfred Thompson Wallis
Budge, which sounds like something from a Dickens novel to me.
It does, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if those were the first 5 names in Brian Eno's name, which has like 11 names. But
maybe
yeah,
he dropped
fair.
them. Yeah, or it's like a royal. The current king, I think his name is Charles Philip Arthur George or something like that. So they often give kings like 6 names. I think Edward VIII had, I think he had 6 names. So he was named for all 4 patron saints and everything.
So did he go by Mr. Budge?
Well, eventually he was Sir Ernest, but when he started his life, he was just little Ernie. So
Ernie Budge.
Yeah. Ernie Budge. For a long time, he was EAT Budge. And then I think he dropped the T because it's spelled eat Budge,
Sure.
which
Budge.
I think would have been embarrassing. At some point, I'm not sure. As we'll see, he's like a really good self-publicist. So I'm not really sure if that was suggested to him by one of the many wealthy patrons he eventually made.
Yeah, EA Budge feels like a tax accountant or somebody.
Yeah, a tax accountant or the head curator of the British Museum's Egypt collection, which is where he winds up. That's not where he starts, though. Obviously, no one is just born being a curator. Doesn't emerge in Tweed. No, shall we start with his story or?
Let's start where you want to start. We've arrived at the door of his story. We're at the
We've
gates.
arrived at the door. Yeah. Okay. So, Budge is born in 1857 in Bodmin, Cornwall. Have you ever been to Cornwall?
Remind me where Cornwall. Remind me of the top towns in Cornwall.
Well, Bodmin is one of them, Truro, St. Ives. Cornwall is the skinny bit that sticks down to the southwest.
Oh, yeah. So I've
England.
been to Exeter.
Exeter's in Cornwall as well, yes.
And
yes.
I've been like across, but I probably Exeter is as far down as I've been. I've always wanted to go to Penzance just for the pirates, but I've never made it that far. But yeah, so Exeter, let's call it. Let's say I have been to Cornwall.
Okay, you have been. No, if you've been in Exeter, you have legitimately been in Cornwall.
I played a rock show. I played a rock show in Exeter.
Oh, that's more than I can say. I can say I went to Tintagel and carried a toddler up and down cliff faces, but I've never played a rock show, so let alone in Exeter. But he's born in Bodmin, which is not, it's about as far inland in Cornwall as you can get. It's at the top of Bodmin Moor, which famously has a beast, which is probably just very large house cats. Unfortunately, spoiler alert.
Do most moors have beasts?
I imagine most of them do if they don't have Bronte sisters wandering around. Those are more of a northern phenomenon, but this is southwestern Britain.
Got it. Yeah.
And his mother is a teenage kitchen maid. She leaves the father line blank on the birth certificate, and he has no idea who his father was. So he's born to this very poor young woman in what is then a very small, maybe a couple of thousand people at most, which passes as a pretty big city in the 1850s, but it's basically a farm town. And he wrote in the 1920s a very long, gossipy, often quite charming autobiography about himself. And he just kind of glosses over this whole aspect of his life, as you would back then. Like, I don't know who my father is, and that's a big deal in Britain.
And so his teenage chambermaid mother gives him this very posh six-name...
Gives him this six name. She burdens him with all these names. And there's only like one contemporary biographer was a 2011 biography that I read. And he kind of this biographer went through and tried to figure out where they all come from. And they're all plausibly names from her side of the family. Like she's picked, there's no name that sticks out as being, oh, this could be a reference to whoever the father was. But, it could have been a kitchen boy. It could have been the master of the house. It could have been some other person who, for whatever reason, wasn't available. But she never tried to make him legitimate. It could have been the beast. Yeah. He does exhibit some beastly behaviors later, but not quite to the level of lurking on a moor. She never tried to make him legitimate. Like, she never married anyone right away or anything like that. And regardless of who the father was or wasn't, Budge doesn't stay in Cornwall very long. By the 1861 census, he is living in London with his aunt and his grandmother. And he's going to school.
Right, that wouldn't have necessarily been his normal fate, right?
No, Yeah, a lot of kids either ran wild or they were put to work doing tiny menial jobs. And, this is the height of the Industrial Revolution. So, the fact that he was in school, the grandmother did own a lodging house, so she probably had a little bit of money. But also at this point, they're beginning to talk about state-funded public education in Britain at this point. And there are a lot of schools, like charitable schools for youngsters, extant, where they can stay till they're 12. And that's kind of what he does. This was a school in Notting Hill, in some guy's house. And one of the teachers he had there, for instance, was an Oxford graduate who had to leave his college in disgrace because he converted to Catholicism. So these are the kinds of guys we're talking about. Like, they're educated, they're bright, but they've bumped up against all the various arcane religious and class tripwires that exist in this part of Britain.
They're heretical at that.
They're heretical. Yeah. It's very funny to read about that period when Catholicism was kind of making a resurgence. There was big controversies about it, and just how exercised people would get about it. We're losing him. He's lost to us. He's gone to Rome. Like, whole families writing to one another. But at the school, little Ernie is an excellent student. He's really, really into languages, it turns out. He says in his autobiography that he liked biblical history. And what he wanted to do, he wanted to be able to read the histories of the kings of Judah. He liked all those fights and stuff in the Old Testament. Wanted to be able to read it in the original language. So out of the master's special library that you could access if you finished all your old lessons, there's Hebrew grammar books, and this kid teaches himself grammar. And he says he was 8 when he started this project.
Wow.
So yeah, 8 years old, teaching himself Hebrew. And when he was done with Hebrew, he moved on to Syriac, started teaching himself that. And then he was very lucky that his schoolmaster, the headmaster, had books on Assyrian, which had only lately been cracked. It had only been cracked in the late 1830s. So he started teaching himself to decipher cuneiform.
Wow.
And this schoolmaster was an Oxford educated guy. Like I said, his name is Charles Seeger. And even though he lost his job, he was still active in several scholarly societies that didn't really care about it's fine with us that you're Catholic, just don't come in here smelling of incense to the club and, we'll look the other way. And this guy, Charles Seeger, was close friends with a man named Henry Rawlinson. There will be a lot of names in this. I don't expect people to take notes.
But Henry Rollins, would be he'd be a major figure in our own time.
He'd be a major figure in our own time. That's true. Yeah, this guy Rawlinson, he was actually the British scholar who contributed most to the decipherment of cuneiform. So it was really lucky that Budge's headmaster was friends with this guy.
Is cuneiform, is that the Demotic language that's on the Rosetta Stone, or is that?
No, Demotic is a form of Egyptian hieroglyphs that's related to Coptic. So cuneiform is the wedge-shaped writing. It was used for many languages. Right. You ran into it I know Ken has talked about it on a couple of shows. Ea Nasir, the copper merchant, those little tiny tablets that are as big as the palm of your hand.
Yeah, little sort of toenail clippings, but
it looks like bird tracks if you're squinting at it, but it's basically just a pen, and the reed is triangular shaped because you squeeze it and that collapses the sides, so you get this and you're printing in the clay. So this was not quite as celebrated as the French guy who Champollion, who cracked the inscription on the Rosetta Stone, which he never saw, by the way. I read about him for one of my episodes. He never actually saw the Rosetta Stone. He was working for Rubbings. So if you've been to the British Museum, you've seen the Rosetta Stone, you have been closer to it than the guy who actually deciphered hieroglyphics ever was.
Oh, I'd never heard that story. That's
cool. That was one of the key facts of that whole thing for me. Just working away in his garret, making himself sick. But anyway, back to Budge. So his schoolmaster Charles Seeger was also friends with a guy called Samuel Birch, who was the keeper of Oriental Antiquities at the British Museum and the president of the Society of Biblical Archaeology. So he was very lucky, this little kid. that he winds up in the company of a man who knows these people and can continue to get him books. And they're all very impressed. Seeger was very impressed and was telling his friends about this kid. But then in 1870, Budge turns 12 and he can't afford to go to secondary school, so he has to get a job.
Have you ever met anyone who speaks ancient languages or speaks ancient language?
I mean, I know one person, my dad's uncle, one of my great uncles, he could read some ancient Greek, but that's about it. Like, no, I don't know. Do you? Have you?
When I was in college at the University of Washington, there was an ancient language sort of focus to the in linguistics, and there were a couple of kids, one in particular who could speak sort of conversational Aramaic, and I thought, what an unusual, at the time I thought, that's like, I work at a magazine shop, that's pretty impressive, but I haven't talked to that guy in a long, long time. But yeah, to focus on that and to be good enough at languages to become fluent, and not just fluent like on the page, but like conversant, it always struck me as a real, like a great gift.
Yeah, it is a gift. It's something I've on and off worked really hard at and just not been able to do, because as you hear, my accent doesn't shift. And so when I get to a point where I'm fairly fluent at reading and I'm fairly fluent at writing, and I can understand a good chunk of what's said to me, but to make it come out of my mouth is just like, I'm just like tipping out a drawer of silverware onto the table. That's about as coherent as that speech gets. But anyway, our boy Budge, he gets a job, and he's very lucky because, he's literally a Victorian orphan. This is 1870s Britain, or 1870s London, but he can read and write. So he is not sent to go paste bottles, labels onto bottles of shoe polish like Charles Dickens was. Instead, he winds up working as a clerk, but they would pronounce it Clark. So I'm going to say that. He winds up working as a clerk in the central offices of W.H. Smith and Company. Now, W.H. Smith they're still in existence. They've almost been gutted by private equity, but you can still find them in the railway stations. And they sell books and stationery. In the 19th century, they were just taking over the country because that's when the railroads are spreading. And they got exclusive licenses from the government to sell stuff.
They used to be everywhere. Everywhere.
Yeah, they were everywhere. You still find them in the larger train stations, but on the high street, they recently had a change. Like they're now called something like J.G. Jones or something. They just it's very strange.
HBO Max. Sad. They changed it to Max.
Yes, HBO Max, Apple TV Plus, same thing. He is working in the books department. He's helping keep records. He's running off errands and things like that. And one of the perks of it is that, yes, he's working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, but he gets to take home damaged books and read them. So he's reading everything. Like he's not just, obviously W.H. Smith isn't selling like Assyrian grammar in the right. Paddington Station.
He's reading
shop.
Punch.
He's reading Punch. He's reading at this point, there was beginning to be like a literature around, I'm an archaeologist and I went to Nineveh. So there's a big popular book by a guy called Henry Layard called My Voyage to Nineveh. I forget the exact name of the title, but Budge says, like, I read that and it kind of fired my imagination. I wanted to see far places. I wanted to do that sort of thing. But he's working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Do you think they sold Viz? Were they publishing Viz already?
Were they publishing Viz already? Possibly. I wouldn't put it past them. It's the kind of thing you think like, over here, we're like, oh, wow, that brand's lasted, or in America, we're like, that brand has lasted 50 years. That's amazing. And over here, it's just like, yeah, this paper's been extant since George II was on the throne. So
now what you're saying is his original interest in language and archaeology was not accompanied by a desire to be an adventurer and a swashbuckler, and he then connected the two when he was working at W.H. Smith?
That's what it sounds like to me, and that's what I remember of I plowed my way through his entire biography, which is called By Nile and Tigris, by the way, which is very nice. I think he had a certain, oh, I can't do that because of who I am. I'm just a boy, Kids pick up that sense of place of who and what they can do and what they can be very early. And I don't think it was any different for him. So this, however, made him feel like that is something I wish I could be. One thing that young men had in these days was a pretty decent lunch break, like 90 minutes, hour and 90 minutes. And because he was friends with Seeger had connections. He says, hey, you can go on your lunch break, you can go to the library at St. Paul's Cathedral. There's like a reading room there, and they have language books, and you can go there and you can read. So he starts doing that. He's, very diligent. He's continuing to teach himself Syriac and Arabic and all these other things. And he gets noticed by another patron, this guy called John Stainer. He's the musical director at St. Paul's. His official title was organist, but that sounds very menial. He was really the musical director, and he was connected to very many Oxford people. And this is another connection to the Society of Biblical Archaeology. So at some point in their acquaintance, little Budge explains that he'd like to actually go to the British Museum reading room, but they have an age requirement, and he's too young. He's only about 14 or 15 at this point. And you have to be, I think, 21 to get in there. And the British Museum reading room is where it's happening, because not only can you get access to books, but if you show the right kind of talent, you can actually help out with things like this. So
see the things.
Yeah, because at that point, British Museum hadn't quite become open to the public in the way we would think of it today. You had to apply. You had to make an appointment and apply, and they would check you out first. You had to go and talk to someone, and I'm not going to steal anything. I'm not going to, lick the exhibits. And then they'd decide to let you in. So Seeger goes to Samuel Birch. He's the curator at the British Museum. And asks him, hey, I've got this really bright little kid from Cornwall here. Can you make an exception? He's really diligent. He's taught himself all these languages. And Birch says, no, not yet.
Oh, oof. Oh,
yeah.
That's not what I would have expected from your story.
Nope. Birch is interesting. Birch is like, Cornish orphan. Ugh. However, he says he will, once or twice a week, allow this boy to come and sit in his office away from all the older men, and he will give him books and things to work with. So now he has his in. And after a certain point, he's even allowed to look at and handle the clay tablets from Assyria. So, yeah.
So at this point in the UK, this is post-Dickens, and there is a sense that the bright young children of the poor could, in fact, there was a social services aspect to the culture, and if you were a privileged person, you could adopt some urchin.
Yes, and he is everyone's favorite urchin, because you don't get many urchins who teach themselves Arabic. It's he does become everyone's favorite urchin, and there's also a precedent for an urchin who makes an amazing discovery. Although this guy wasn't an urchin, and I think Ken has discussed this guy before on the show, but his name is George Smith. He was a printer's engraver. He worked at the Bank of England engraving banknotes, and like the boy Budge, he's older. He's like 26, 27. Smith, when he starts out here in the reading room, he's interested in biblical history, and he's really fired up about this, the clay tablets. So he starts reading them, and gradually, actual scholars milling about in the British Library reading room realize that this guy is really good at matching them together. They give him an actual job. This guy, they hire him away from the bank, and he is the person who rediscovered the Epic of Gilgamesh. Nobody knew about it, had been lost for, at that point, I think about 1,500 years. And within the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is a story that is beat for beat the same story as Noah's Ark. And there is a tale told about George Smith in November 1872, I think. He's in the reading room, and he's deciphering this, and he realizes what he's reading, and he gets up And he's so excited that he starts taking off his clothes in the middle of the reading room. That's one of the few stories because he's like, I am the first person to have read this after 2,000 years of oblivion. There is one source that tells us that George Smith did this, that he jumped up and ran around the room. And, quote, Smith said, I am the first man to read that after more than 2,000 years of oblivion. Setting the tablet on the table, he jumped up and rushed about the room in a great state of excitement, and to the astonishment of those present, began to undress himself. But the source we have for that, the only source, is Budge. And that is from his autobiography. And it's very unlikely that he was in the room at the time. It's possible that he heard it from other people, but at the time he wrote that biography, George Smith was long dead. He died in, I think he died in Aleppo in Syria of dysentery, as adventurers often did in those days, and people on the Oregon Trail. So that's at least what video games taught me when I was small.
And was Budge a colorful writer where he would be inclined to sort of exaggerate his story?
He was an embellisher, as we will see. And like that story is possibly one of his biggest embellishments, because that's become that's the one thing you hear about George Smith, when people talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh. Oh, yeah, this guy is so excited he's stripped off in the middle of a public reading room. But he's kind of stuck in this guy's office. Birch is putting up with him as a favor to his friends. Birch never really he accepted that this kid had talent, but he never took him to heart the way that Seeger and Stainer did. Seeger is then given permission by Birch to bring little Budge along to meetings of the Society for Biblical Archaeology, of which Birch is the president. And Budge sits in the corner and he takes notes and he rubs shoulders with Sir Austin Layard, who's the guy who dug up the city of Nineveh, which is where the library that the Epic of Gilgamesh was found. And one of the other members of the Society for Biblical Archaeology was Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone. So little Budge is bumping up against the Lion of Parliament.
Right.
Yeah. And he also becomes friendly with George Smith, because George Smith at this point in the 1870s, before he goes on his doomed expedition to find more tablets, is very big in the Society of Biblical Archaeology. He's their wonderkind. He found the thing. In 1877, Budge is about 20, and he's ready to move on from W.H. Smith. He's ready to move on from lunch break learning. And he's very excited to hear that an assistant keeper position has opened up at the museum. And he applies for it. He gets testimonials from Seeger and Stainer, and he even gets one from William Gladstone, who liked to help poor orphans. Gladstone also liked to walk the streets at night and talk to prostitutes. So probably Budge shouldn't have felt like that special about him noticing him. But anyway.
Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of wisdom in the street culture of prostitutes.
Well, yes. Well, and, our Lord, we are told, Mary Magdalene was a prostitute and she followed him. But sometimes Gladstone would also go back to their rooms for what I'm sure were very chaste, very long chats about scripture, probably. Anyway, Budge doesn't get the job.
Because he's up against other candidates who have actually graduated from Oxford and Cambridge.
He's up against people who have had some secondary education. So the assistant keeper thing is kind of seen as like it's fairly menial. You don't necessarily have to. But this other guy whose name is Theosophilus Pinches, another great name.
Yeah, born for the job.
Theosophilus Pinches. Yeah, and his thing is he has more formal education. He's done a few years at secondary school. And so he fits in better with the other actual Oxford-educated people. But at some point, Pinches messes something up he's supposed to do. He messes up a translation or he drops a tablet or something, and Budge is on top of it. He writes a letter to Birch hinting that Mr. Pinches may be relying on other people to do his translating for him. Yeah. This does not help Budge professionally. with
he's a tattletale.
Yeah, with Birch. It doesn't help him, but he gets another opportunity. His patrons and Gladstone decide that he should go to Cambridge. So, yeah.
Oh, they give him a scholarship.
Basically, yeah. First, he has to pass the exams. And because he doesn't have secondary education, like the entrance exams involve ancient Greek and Latin, which he only has a little bit of. So they send him to what's called a crammer. And he spends a year trying to catch up on all the stuff he's missed, from however many years, 7 years of secondary school in a year. He just scrapes through the entrance exam and he gets a place on one of Cambridge's new degrees in Semitic languages. So the Semitic languages like Hebrew, Syriac, all that stuff. He does well in his subject. He's not great in Greek and Latin and maths. And you can tell I've been here 20 years because every now and then I do say something.
I heard it.
Maths. Also, basil, oregano. So, yeah.
I'll forgive the first two, but oregano is not.
Oregano still feels wrong, but I get laughed at if I say something different. I do say yogurt, though. I don't say yogurt. I'm not.
Where are you
that.
on aluminum? Yeah.
It's their fault.
Yeah.
They changed it. They started as aluminium. They're like, it doesn't quite fit with the naming convention, so we'll change it to aluminum. And then they decided to change it back to aluminium. So they have no one to blame for that but themselves. Again, we'll have a live citizenship application, so don't tell the Home Office I said all this.
I don't want to get you in trouble. Sure.
Yeah, please. I don't want to be deported. Living in a shack by the Delaware River. Yeah. So Budge is good as his subject. He's very diligent. And he later in life, he tells his friend, Rider Haggard, who's the author of books like King Solomon's Mines, which is kind of, part of the, this adventure writer.
Yeah. Any young boy my dad's age would have read it.
Yeah, right. 1921, your dad, right?
That's right.
That's right. Okay. Same as my dad's father. So my grandfather. It's weird because we're not that far apart in age. Anyway, in addition to being diligent, Budge, on one occasion before a clutch exam that he has to pass, has a precognitive dream. So he dreams a dream, which he sees himself seated not in the examination room, like they have a specific examination hall at Cambridge, but he's in this room with a shed. It looks like a shed with a skylight. And the tutor comes in. He's got an envelope. He takes out of the envelope some green papers and he puts them on the table in front of Budge. And he goes out and he locks the door and he leaves them in shed room. And Budge looks at these green papers and it has 4 Assyrian texts on it that he couldn't translate. And in the dream, he became so overwhelmed by anxiety that he actually woke up in real life. I was like, went downstairs into his study, lit a fire, lit candles, got his books out, and decided, I'm awake anyway. I may as well, probably not that long till the sun came up or whatever. Gets down and he studies. And he's flipping through his books and he spots one of these texts. And then he spots the other and the other and the other. And he translates them while he's studying. And then later that morning, he goes off. He has his baked beans on toast, probably, and then he goes off to do his exam. So when he arrives at the hall where the exams were held, the previous group was, they're held over. They're taking too long. So the tutor is like, look, you're the only one who's weird enough to study these languages, so I'll get you started and follow me. And he takes him through a series of rooms into this little shed-like room with a skylight, takes out 3 green papers, puts them down, and Budge is just like, yep, those are the texts, and he aces the exam.
Wow. Now, do you think that this is some kind of exaggeration on his part, or is that he's self-mythologizing?
I think possibly. We'll say, as we'll see, he collects some interesting friends because he eventually becomes curator of the Egyptian collection at the British Museum. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that. And he collects some very interesting, spooky friends. And so he does talk about himself later in life as connected to various vibes, basically. He's basically talking about vibes.
Sure, this was the seance era, too, or coming into the seance era.
Yeah, we're getting into the seance era in the 1870s, absolutely. So he passes that exam. but he doesn't graduate with honors because of the ancient Greek and the maths. The other thing is that his assessors said that he really didn't have a very classically fluent writing style. Like, he hadn't read enough books, basically, which is kind of ridiculous to say to this kid who, like, kept his spirit alive by reading books while he was working 10 hours a day. But he was able to get a modest fellowship in Hebrew. But the hope was his patrons, Stainer and Gladstone and the rest, they were hoping that he would be able to do a master's degree and then become an Oxford Don. They wanted him to go into academia because he'd been a gossip and he'd messed things up with Birch back at the museum. But they started to realize that maybe he's not cut out for academia, and now we need to find this kid a job, or else it's back to W.H. Smith for him. And we've put a pretty fair amount of money into this kid at this point. So they're like, maybe we could get him a job at the Foreign Office, but they didn't want him. They thought about sending him off to support a guy named Hormuz Rassam, who was another wonderkind, but he was an Iraqi guy who had assisted Henry Layard, who dug up Nineveh. Hormuz Rassam is the guy who actually found the library. He is the one who dug up the physical, his teams dug up the physical tablets where the Epic of Gilgamesh were found. And he was, he'd come to England. He'd been Oxford educated. He was very well respected at this point. And Hormuz Rassam, he's like, well, I've already got someone, unfortunately, but if I have a vacancy, he can come work with me. Then they decided maybe he can become an inspector of the new state-run secondary schools, because since, we're in the 1880s now, there is a Public Education Act that provides a certain level of education. But he does not get that position either. However, another assistant keepership opens up at the British Museum. And he almost doesn't get this because Samuel Birch is like, Mr. Gossip, I don't want him back here causing problems. So probably doesn't like his accent. Cornish people, I can't do the accent, but they sound kind of like pirates to us, because the actor who played Long John Silver in Treasure Island was Cornish, and he used that accent. And so that's why we associate those two things. Birch is a conservative. So this part may have been partly politically motivated. Budge was the pet of the liberal PM, Gladstone. So that could have been part of it. But it could also have been because, Budge he liked to stir stuff up. Nobody else suitable applies, however. And Gladstone kind of like puts his thumb on the scale, like, please,
that's the best when you're the only applicant,
Yeah. We please take this guy off our hands. Well, no, I think he was genuinely interested in Budge's welfare. But this is when Budge's actual grown-up career begins in 1883. So he's in.
And these were heady times, 1883, for archaeology. Is that right? What was happening?
Oh, yeah. Lots of things are happening. I mean, so at this point, archaeology is starting to mature. I mean, we can swerve here. So it sort of starts with Napoleon and his boys back in the 1790s. They invade Egypt. They find the Rosetta Stone. Napoleon
they take every obelisk that isn't nailed down.
Basically, yeah. And Napoleon actually goes in expecting to do that. He has a team of archaeologists and architecture people ready to go, and they do this massive survey of everything. So it all starts there. And then the British kick Napoleon out of Egypt in 1801, and they take over. And you have this massive, it's an imperial arms race. It's like a Cold War fought over scarab beetles and, like you said, obelisks. One of my favorite collectors in this early period is he's working for the British Museum, but he didn't start there. He started as a strong man at Covent Garden, this Italian guy called Giovanni Battista Belzoni, becomes known as the Great Belzoni. He's informally educated. And like I said, he's on stage at Covent Garden. Like, his main bit, he would put this harness on, multiple straps. He's like 6'8", according to most accounts. He put this harness on that had all these straps on it. He picked 10 men out of the audience, and they'd climb into these straps, and he'd walk around the stage up and down with them, someone who saw him says, as if he were carrying kittens.
10 men.
10 men, big, strong guy. At some point at a party, our boy Belzoni, he meets an Egyptian government official, and he sort of talks his way into a job. Yeah, I've been on stage, and we had a really elaborate set that had hydraulics, and we used those, so I could help you with your irrigation plan. And he goes to Egypt when his hydraulic plan does not work out. He winds up becoming an excavator, and he's like a legendary excavator. He becomes the MacGyver of plunderers. There's this massive, it's called the head of young Memnon. It's actually, I think it's Ramesses. You can still see it in the British Museum today. You go and you turn, and in the Egypt halls, there's big pharaoh's head, and it's enormous.
Yeah, I've seen it just recently, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he is the person who got that to the British Museum. It took like teams of laborers rolling logs, special boat construction, like timing it with the Nile flood just perfectly. Like he was the guy. So that is the early part. And now it's maturing by the time our guy Budge is getting into the British Museum officially. In the 1880s, there's like beginning to already then be some reservations about like, should we really be stealing all this stuff from these people? So there are beginning to be regulatory bodies in place. There's like an antiquities board in Egypt that is meant to clear anything anyone wants to take out of the country. Most of the antiquities are supposed to stay in the country, and everything else that goes out has to be cleared with this antiquities board. As we'll see, most of the museums did not play by those rules. Budge is going to become probably one of the best collectors the British Museum ever had. There are 100,000 artifacts in the British Museum's Egyptian collection today. 10,000 of them were found by Budge.
Whoa.
He is responsible for 10% of what you see at the British Museum, and you know what they have in their back rooms that hasn't been sold on eBay. That was a scandal recently. They had someone inside was getting stuff like selling it randomly. So,
No
yeah.
kidding. Wow.
Yeah, big problem.
Well, so 1882 is exactly when England colonizes Egypt, right? Isn't this the precise moment that the English take over Egypt formally from
Yes, and that is about the time that Disraeli manages the Suez Canal deal that gets Britain most of the shares of the Suez Canal Company. I mean, the French did all the legwork of building that, but the British get their hands on the canal because it's their route to India. So
Sure. And harumph about the French.
Yeah. Too bad, so sad. It's what happens when you have a revolution and then a reinstatement of the monarchy and then another revolution and then
you blow it.
Yeah.
You lose your advantage.
You lose your advantage. Just keep those kings in place. You can just make them progressively less relevant. You don't have to cut their heads off. Anyway, so Budge's initial job is just scut work. He's like packing stuff, he's translating everything, but he's constantly like tugging at Birch's coattails. Please, Mr. Birch, I want to go. And it takes Birch dying for Budge to finally be given permission to go, because he gets in good with the new head curator, who's a Frenchman, and he likes Budge or tolerates Budge for whatever reason. So in 1886, he is given money by the trustees of the British Museum and a couple of other institutions like Cambridge University to buy antiquities with, and they said, go with God. Go, my son, go to Egypt. So he goes for the first time. He is a spider, John. He is so good at working connections and just like schmoozing his way into people. He charters sailing boats. He goes up and down the Nile, visits city where there are black market antiquities dealers going, right. And he gets to know them all. He goes to the excavation sites and he sort of like listens to what the diggers are saying, because unlike a lot of these British Museum guys, he can speak a lot of the languages. Right. He's one of the few people. And by this point, he has also taught himself hieroglyphics. So if he picks up a piece, he can know like whether this is just like we gave the workers beer, or, you know, a proclamation that is interesting to someone. So he has this linguistic advantage.
And he's probably of all the diggers, the only one that can read hieroglyphics.
Yeah, so that's the thing. That's one of the reasons why they wanted to send him out with this guy Hormuz Rassam in Iraq, because Rassam couldn't read cuneiform. He couldn't read any of that stuff. So he was just indiscriminately grabbing things and sending them back. And sometimes they're like, the British Museum would get stuff and they'd be like, this is all like land sale records. We were looking for another Gilgamesh type thing. And if they'd had someone who could read the tablets on site, they might have acquired more interesting pieces. But that is Budge's advantage in Egypt. So he is bribing customs officials. He is paying off workers to tell him where anything good is found. And the British consul in Cairo hates him for this. There is a meeting between him and the consul's constantly like, Budge, get in here, come to Cairo. I need to talk to you about what you're doing. And, don't go up the river. Don't buy things from the antiquities market. And Budge is like, okay. And he goes and he buys things from the antiquity market. And Budge reminds him at one point, quote, that I was not a member of his staff and that I intended to carry out the instructions of the trustees and do my utmost to increase the collections of the British Museum.
Wow.
No matter
he's
what.
not obeying the carefully constructed hierarchy of British colonialism.
He is not. And he's not even pretending to obey the consul. He's like, everyone else is doing it. My bosses have told me to do this. So sorry. Goodbye. Me and my whatever I've got are leaving. So his first trick in 1886 is really productive, but it's mostly skulls that he sends back to Britain. He is friends with an anatomy professor at Cambridge who's studying the ancient Egyptians. This is also the high period of eugenics.
Sure, phrenology.
People with, gotta love that phrenology. What were their acquisitiveness nodules like on their skulls? Guys in Cambridge with calipers. But Budge sends this friend of his 270 mummies that he finds in a pit, and he gets a nickname, Master of Skulls.
Master of Skulls. That's the best nickname I've ever heard.
It is so metal, and this guy is not metal at all. He looks like he could be Bilbo Baggins' accountant. He's this round little man with round little glasses and a little fussy mustache. Not a Hitler mustache. It goes all the way, fussy mustache. Yeah. He does not look like a Master of Skulls at all, but he is.
So when you go to the British Museum, at a certain point, you get into the Hall of Mummies or whatever, and it's just mummy after mummy after mummy after mummy. Are these his mummies?
Yes, some of them are his, some of them are Belzoni's, some of them belong to a guy named Flinders Petrie, who is much more respected nowadays than Budge is. Petrie's methods were less underhanded than Budge. He was a lot more scientific, but about logging things and studying things and acquiring things and putting them in their context. But he was also massively racist. Not quite. The Egyptians couldn't have done this. It must have been aliens, but the Egyptians could not have built these pyramids. They must have been like Libyans, or they must have been, from somewhere in Europe. These weren't Africans.
Sure. They're a little too Nubian.
A little too, they couldn't possibly have been brown people.
So now, was Budge good at logging and contextualizing, or no?
To a degree, he definitely published a lot. In fact, he probably published a little bit too much. By the time he died, he would have been responsible for over 100 books. And there's a very funny website I found deep inside the British, or very web page that I found deep in the British Museum's website. And the headline is like, why are there no books by Budge in our library anymore? And it's like, well, he was a little too prolific to be careful. I think that's how they phrased it. Basically, like, he wrote so much, like, he didn't get it right very often. Right. As a translator, he was good enough to get published, but it hasn't held up over time, Got
it.
Yeah, the whole science of that has changed. On one occasion, Budge is in Egypt. He arranges to buy a slab with some interesting Greek inscriptions on it, and then it goes missing from his boat. Like, he's popped on his boat. So he collaborates with the local officials, like local Arabic-speaking officials, to find the guy who stole it and punish him, because he figures out it's one of the workmen. And this poor workman is arrested, and he has the soles of his feet beaten 100 times. But Budge gets his stone, and he says in a letter to his boss that, like, I'm very satisfied with how this worked out. Isn't it good that I can speak Arabic? I can get them to thrash people to get our Greek inscriptions back for us. So he's that kind of guy. His second trip, they send him to Iraq. Less interesting, but important for later. He gets sent to Iraq to look into reports that artifacts being dug up at museum sites, because this is all the Ottoman Empire, Egypt and Iraq. And how it worked is the governments of the European museums would apply. So France and England would apply. They'd get permission from the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And anything you found at that site was supposed to be, pending a review by the Antiquities Board. It was supposed to be yours to keep and take back to your museum. But often stuff would get sold onto the black market, like workers would pocket stuff or they'd hide stuff in their clothes and it would get sold. So there was a lot of reports that these sites in Iraq that had been set up by Hormuz Rassam, they'd basically, like, the British Museum kind of left this guy Rassam out to dry at some point. Like, they were more interested in what was coming out of Egypt than what was coming out of Iraq. So they basically, like, he went up like McDonald's franchising all these sites all over Iraq. They were poorly supervised and stuff was leaking out. So Budge is sent to look into this. And he reports, this is happening. And then he embellishes. Instead of saying, Rassam probably needs more help here, Rassam has spread a little thin, he says Rassam is allowing this to happen, and all of these people are his relatives.
Oh, man. So he's so now he seems like someone interested in power.
Yes. Interested. I think Budge had a pretty acute sense of just how high he could rise, and he was willing to, like, pull on the strings to get him to that place. I don't think he expected to be, like, the head of the museum or a lord in the House of Lords or anything like that. But I think he knew that as someone with a slightly dodgy personal and academic pedigree, he was more vulnerable than others. And here's another guy with a less dodgy personal pedigree. Like, Rassam came from a decent Coptic Christian family in Iraq. But, he had like a sort of catch as catch can education at Oxford. And he was an Iraqi guy. So,
right. Well, so now do you get the sense that he was in it, that now he was becoming very ambitious in terms of compiling personal wealth? Or was he just interested in having authority?
I think he was just interested in having authority. I think he really liked the wheeling and dealing that he was doing. I think he really liked the fact that he was bringing all this stuff back to the museum and he was beginning to be respected in a way he hadn't been. I don't think he was ever that wealthy. He was able eventually to leave some money after his death. There is a chair, it's in his wife's name, actually. It's the Lady Budge Research Fellowship in Egyptology at Cambridge. And it's still, there's still scholars in place there to this day. But he wasn't rolling steel wealthy, John. Yeah. But the third trip is the really interesting one. The third trip is when he finds the item that will make his career. It is called the Papyrus of Ani. And it is one of the most spectacular examples ever found of an Egyptian Book of the Dead.
And written on papyrus, as I would say.
On papyrus, as you would say. I was going to let you do that. I wasn't going to step on your toes there. No, I have the same issue. I acquired most of my vocabulary through reading, and every now and then I throw out a word, and people are like, "That's not how you say that." Do you know what an Egyptian Book of the Dead is?
Well, no, not well enough to be conversant. So lay it on me. What is the Egyptian Book of the Dead?
Well, there's a longstanding misconception that it's like a Bible, that like this is what the Egyptians believe, and it's not. It's a manual for dead people about how to behave in the afterlife. Like, this is how you avoid getting completely annihilated in the afterlife. This is how you like regain power over your body and stuff like that. So it's
not a book of the dead. It's a book of being dead.
book of being dead, a book for the dead, really. I mean, they called it the Book of Going Forth by Day. And it was some random, because the Germans were very involved in this later part of Egyptian archaeology. So from like 1860, I want to say onward, they were very present. And it was a German who gave it the name, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So originally, it's a series of spells that the dead person is supposed to recite to like protect them and give them power over their body again in the afterlife. Originally, they were only for the pharaoh. Over time, just about any rich person could commission one to be put in their tomb with them. So we have a lot of these from different burials across Egypt, and they seem to have been a feature of burials for about 2,000 years. There have like almost 200 different spells they found across all the different books of the dead. And the evidence shows that they're quite consistent over time. That's one of the things that blows your mind when you start reading about ancient Egypt, is just like how long the basic lines of their culture persisted. Like ancient Greek is here and gone maybe in 700 years. And the Egyptians are just like, yep, we started with the woolly mammoths and we went out with the Caesars.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we're still hoping to find all these apocryphal Bibles and what was that Quran that was found recently in some minaret, where it was like, oh no, these aren't the stories that you're looking for. You know,
I forget the name of there's a name of the place in Turkey where they found like a trash dump basically, and there's all this papyrus or papyrus, as you would pronounce it. And they're finding all these apocryphal stories about Jesus that appear to come from Islamic writings because they're in Arabic. There's all this stuff we're constantly finding. We will probably find something older than Gilgamesh, which is about 4,000 years old. We have tablets that are bits of that story going back 4,000 years. We could potentially find something older than that in Turkey or in what we've popularly called the Indus Valley civilization until recently. I think they call them the Harappan people. I think that's the preferred term now. But they have a writing system that we haven't cracked yet. So it could potentially be something older there.
And we have a lot of material in that writing, and we're just waiting for a translation.
I think so, yeah. We are just waiting to see how that'll work. But,
it's funny when you find little things like that where you realize we're still in the middle of history. We're not at the end of it, as we would like to popularly believe that it's all been done.
It's all been done. It can't get any. We are the peak of progress. We are not. We are just some people bumbling around, scrolling and not leaving any stone. I feel like I should be putting things on clay tablets more often instead of typing them onto pixelated screens.
That's why we're putting everything here on platinum disc.
That's right. I'm going to be on a platinum disc. Thank God. Thank God. That's right. So anyway, Book of the Dead has a basic structure. So first, the dead person, oh, you're dead. Oh, darn. So here are some spells to help you regain the powers of movement and speech. Then speak a bunch of incantations that give you the right to travel across the sky in the ship of the sun with the god Re. Then you descend into the Duat, which is like going down the pipe in Super Mario World, and there's all those like dark turtles and dark mushrooms and things in there. Maybe that's, I'm a last minute Gen Xer, so maybe that resonates more with me than it does with you. But you have to travel at night, and you have to traverse this landscape that there's like serpents and pits and jackals and all that stuff. And then when you get to the palace of Osiris, the god of the underworld, you are judged by a tribunal of 42 minor deities. The god Thoth weighs your heart next to a feather. And if it weighs less than the feather, you're good. Eternal life for you. If it weighs more than the feather, too bad, so sad. It gets eaten by the hippo god Amet the Devourer, and you are annihilated. That's it for you. No more you.
Well, these are all the same exact stories as in the Bible. How curious.
Or there's a lot of this in Greek mythology too. So, right. Like Orpheus in the underworld, and you have to do it right. But anyway, assuming that you said the spells right, you pass the weighing and you take your place in the afterlife with the gods. You become a god. So funny thing is, the wealthiest people could have a bespoke Book of the Dead with their name put into it. And like, the drawings would be made to look more or less like the person and things like that. But there was also like an industry of prefabricated Books of the Dead where they draw all the spells out beforehand and they leave spaces so they could go and write the dead person's name in after
Your
they
name
bought
here,
it.
sure.
Yeah. And the Papyrus of Ani is one of these prefabricated. It's one of these prefabricated Books of the Dead. It's like he went to the mall and got one of those Your Kids with Santa stories printed out, But it's amazing. It's 78 feet long. It's just beautifully colored. And Budge is really excited about it. Hang on, I have a visual aid.
Oh, wow. It is beautiful. Look at that.
It is beautiful. I've got this big coffee table edition. This is the Papyrus of Ani. And
so is the Papyrus of Ani kind of what we think of when we talk of the Book of the Dead as a thing that like goth girls would have in their
yes.
dorm rooms?
Yes. And then you try to read it and you're just like, this makes no sense. Like one of the spells is like, my heart is mine in the house of hearts. My heart is mine in the house of hearts. My heart is mine and it is at rest there. And then you go through all the body parts like, my mouth will be given to me that I may speak with it, my legs to walk and my arms to fell my enemy. My soul and my corpse shall not be restrained at the portals of the West when I go in or out in peace. And that sounds impressive, but also you're just kind of like, okay, all right.
I mean, the big question for me is if you are dead and the first couple of spells are to reanimate your ability to talk, that seems to be there's a gap there. You can't talk. You got to say those first ones.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's something that the people who leave you in the tomb do that gives you that power back. But yet there is like a bit of a disconnect there. Here's some spells you can say to give yourself the power of speech.
Yeah.
We'll move on with this in a second. But there's a section where the person who's dead has to personally address all of the gods at the tribunal and like say like, I'm innocent. I've never fornicated with someone else's husband. I've never cheated on my offerings. I've never done this.
All 42 gods?
All 42 of them. And they have some really fantastic names. So there's hippopotamus-faced, one who repels the crocodile, nosy, Caesar of bread, raging of voice. That's all one name. And hot legs.
Hot legs?
Hot legs. I know. I don't know if that's temperature or aesthetics, but I hope it's aesthetics. Because
that reoccurs in the Gospel of MASH.
Nice. Yes, it does. Anyway, Budge really, 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 really wants this papyrus. And the new head of the Antiquities Authority really does not want Budge to have it. He's a Frenchman named Eugène Grebeau. He's the head of the Antiquities Authority in Egypt. He hates Budge. He starts tailing him in Thebes.
Oh, tailing him in Thebes.
In 1887, yes. So Budge is making deals to acquire this papyrus. He makes an offer to the dealer. Dealer accepts it. Budge gets this papyrus on his boat. He starts sailing up the river to Cairo from Thebes. So it's like a 400-mile trip. It's a multiple-day trip at this point. And he is in a wind-powered ship. But Grebeau, when he finally realizes that Budge has got away from him, he's like, don't worry, we'll catch up to him. We've got a steamboat.
This feels like a Wes Anderson movie now. You've got like a...
It is a little bit like a Wes, and it's about to get even more like a Wes Anderson movie because as they're gaining on Budge, the steamboat pilot realizes, oh, I need to stop and attend a wedding. But don't worry, we'll get going like later tonight. So he like pulls to the side of the Nile River and he attends his wedding, and Grebeau is there like watching Budge's boat get smaller and smaller and smaller in the distance. Yeah, and making matters worse, Grebeau actually has to fire his assistant because while they're stalled on this little side quest, his assistant has been selling looted trinkets that Grebeau has confiscated off the back of the ship secretly. So Grebeau has all this contraband on his boat that he's taking back to Cairo to put in the museum in Cairo in Egypt, and his assistant is selling it right out from under his nose. So this is just, he's not very good at his job, Grebeau.
Yeah.
But anyway, he gets back to Cairo before Budge is ready to sail for England. He has Budge's warehouse, which is right next to the Luxor Hotel, which is a fashionable hotel. He has it seized. Everything's impounded. He stops short of arresting Budge because Budge has powerful friends. Budge also has a lot of walking around money. So while he's waiting to hear whether or not he's going to be allowed to get this stuff out, he doesn't think he is. He hires some workmen. And on a particular evening, he lures all the guards and customs officers outside the warehouse into the Luxor Hotel. He buys them a lavish multi-course dinner with lots of booze, which they're not supposed to drink. And while he is feasting them, the gang of workmen that he's hired start digging a tunnel from the garden of the Luxor Hotel into Budge's locked warehouse. I have a quote from him about this. He says, "Man after man went into the basement of the house and brought out piece by piece and box by box everything which was of the slightest value commercially. In this way, we saved the papyrus of Ani and all the rest of my acquisitions, and all of Cairo rejoiced."
Wow, saved
He's so
them.
proud of himself. He saved them. He saved
that's
them
how
for the museum.
That's how we know now that 42 is the meaning of the universe.
Yeah, that's how we know 42 is the meaning of the universe. That's how, everyone who doesn't love hot legs, the Egyptian god nowadays, who doesn't think, when they think of ancient Egypt, who doesn't think of hot legs? He made another 13 collecting trips throughout his career, but this was the one that made his name because the book he publishes about it is a bestseller, and he's quite celebrated when he gets back. In addition to collecting artifacts, he's also continuing to collect beefs with other archaeologists. Mm-hmm. We already talked about Flinders Petrie. Budge at one point has a look at some stuff that Flinders Petrie has brought back from Iraq and says, "Hey, these are forgeries. You really should have been more careful about these." Ooh. And Petrie is very taken aback by that.
Yeah, what an accusation.
Yeah, but the main beef that almost derails Budge's career is the one with Hormuz Rassam. So Rassam is like 30 years older than Budge. So he's in his 60s and he's retired and he's living in England. When Budge comes back from his trip and starts putting about the museum that, Rassam was complicit in the selling of antiquities from sites in Iraq. Not a single word of this accusation that Rassam's relatives were in on this scam, that Rassam was masterminding all of this, that Rassam was making a profit off of it. Not a single word of this was true. But the more Budge repeated the story, the more he seemed to convince himself that this was true. Mm-hmm. And when it came time to revise the museum's guidebook in 1890, Budge at this point was in charge of that. He took Rassam's name out of all the catalogs, all the things that Rassam had found. Like normally you'd get a credit for finding this stuff. He took them all out.
So Budge was catty. He was
Budge
was a catty little biatch.
Mm-hmm. He was a messy Budge who lived for drama. And when Austin Henry Layard, who was Rassam's sponsor, basically, he was patron to Rassam the way that all these other guys were patrons to Budge, hears about this. He confronts Budge in the museum, just like, "What are you doing?" He goes to the director of the museum to complain about it, and Budge is obliged to write an apology. It's basically like a notes app apology, screenshot notes app apology, which is "I'm sorry if you were offended" kind of apology. And naturally, Rassam and Layard complain about the quality of the apology, and they get blown off by the director of the museum. They're like, "He said he's sorry. Like, drop it."
So this wasn't a humiliation for Budge. It was sort of...
Not yet. It was, I think the director of the museum at this point, and I forget who it was at that because, Birch is long dead, just kind of didn't want to be bothered with the drama. Like maybe archaeologists and curators frequently scrapped like this. I don't know. But
none of these guys were high status, right? They were all just at the level of...
Yeah. I mean, the only one who was sort of involved in this, who was of a higher status was Austin Henry Layard. At this point, he's a knight, he's an MP, and he decides to go public. He writes a letter to the Times explaining the whole situation. Like, this person, Mr. Budge, has been slandering my friend. If he said this to you, it's not true. And then Rassam files a lawsuit against Budge for slander. And he's demanding £1,000 in damages, which is, I think, the equivalent of it's like 800 grand. I think it's really hard to get an exact conversion to modern money, but it's a lot of money. Yeah. He's really, really, really angry. So in 1893, a trial goes ahead, Rassam versus Budge. And it actually went in Rassam's favor. The judge actually reads the apology that Budge had written initially, and he was just like, I cannot help saying that sounds to me to be as shabby an apology as ever I read in my life. It is not a manly apology. I love that. The jury finds in Rassam's favor. They send a very strong signal that they kind of don't approve of this outsider prosecuting an Englishman, because they don't award Budge, or they don't award Rassam the £1,000. They only award him £20 in damages.
I see. Symbolic slap on.
Yeah. He goes back. Budge goes back to the museum. He's allowed to keep his job. He has to keep a low profile for a little bit. At that point, he's pretty well established in his career, but it's not a high paying job. Most of what he makes his money off of is the books that he starts publishing, and he starts publishing a lot. But then a year later, his boss dies and he gets promoted. He is now the curator of the Assyrian and Egyptian collections. So good for Budge.
Yeah.
And Rassam goes off on some weird diplomatic mission to Ethiopia, I think. And he comes back and he dies an old man, poor in Oxford somewhere. Poor guy. But Budge, he flourishes as the curator. He becomes a member of the Savile Club. He starts hanging out with Kipling and H.G. Wells. He's an in-demand guest at dinner parties because he's very, he's a raconteur. Sure. He's an embellisher. He's very entertaining. He goes to lots of house parties with MPs and lords and things like that. And then as his books become more popular and the museum becomes more open to visitors, he starts to make friends with members of the Order of the Golden Dawn. You've heard of these guys?
Yeah, he's a real adventurer now.
Yeah, he's in with the occultists. I really wanted to find a story that Budge had met Crowley at some point, Aleister Crowley, but
he would be the most prominent.
He would be the most prominent. He never did, but he was friends with William Butler Yeats, the Second Coming poet, who was a big deal in the Order of the Golden Dawn for a long time. They would make trips to the British Library, and they would make trips to the British Museum, and they
After
would
dark.
Sometimes they would commune with the artifacts, and they'd get in good with Budge, and he'd oh, come and you'll want to see this. It's in my office. It's not on display for the plebs. And he'd let them handle things and do little rituals with them, apparently. And there was a lot of talk that he actually let them in and participated in rituals with them after dark, but possibly, there's no hard proof.
Did they try to open the Ark of the Covenant with a bunch of Hebraic incantations?
Hebraic incantations. He would have been the go-to guy for that. He never stopped being able to speak Hebrew after teaching it to himself when he was 8. But as far as I know, he was mostly just showing them around, letting them handle things. He never let them touch the mummies. He never quite went that far. But yeah. One thing he was a member of was, or an affiliate member of, was the Ghost Club. So he does seem to have been interested in investigating ideas of spiritualism and an afterlife. And, a lot of people were at this point. Arthur Conan Doyle famously was convinced that there was an afterlife and that spiritualism and seances were real. So he was an affiliate member, not a full member of the Ghost Club. And he did cross paths with Arthur Conan Doyle. He would have given talks to them about ancient artifacts. He would have showed them lots of Assyrian and Babylonian. There are tons of Assyrian and Babylonian ghost stories. Their whole thing, if the Egyptians were all about protecting yourself after death, the Assyrians and Babylonians, those cultures from Iraq, they were about protecting yourself from the dead. It was constantly just like, oh, you have a headache, it's ghosts. Oh, your husband isn't as amorous as he once was, it's ghosts. You need to keep those ghosts. Got to give him some beer, got to give him some soup. He continued at the museum until 1924. He was knighted not long after that. And on his death, he gave, as I said, what was left of his fortune to Cambridge University, where scholars continue to be Lady Budge scholars to this day.
Wow. So. And amazing, again, to think that he lived into the lifespan of my own father and your grandfather. So
yeah,
a contemporary-esque figure.
Yeah, he's one of those bridging figures between the high Victorian period and, the interwar period. He died in 1934. So, yeah.
And did World War I interfere with his, was he then still doing hands-on archaeology, or had he become a Don here?
Yeah, Dons are at the universities. But right. If I recall correctly, his last trip was in 1914, in the spring of 1914. And he never went out again after that. And there was very limited archaeology happening.
Yeah.
And by the time the war was over, he's kind of like, I'm kind of getting long in the tooth. He was only, 6 years from retirement at that point. So he would have been in his late 50s and probably not all that keen to go up and down the Nile. Even I'm
in my mid to late 50s, and I'm still keen to go up and down the Nile. But these are different times. We have more vitamins now.
We have more vitamins. We have more protein. You weren't a Cornish orphan.
No, that's true. Well, Rose, what a fascinating story, and what a great character to have entered into the omnibus today.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like he was a good fit. Has a real good arc, and I mean a story arc, not an Ark of the Covenant. He's catty, and he connects you to all these different worlds. He's in with the political and the scientific and the occult. So,
well, we always as Americans, we like a story where a ambitious upstart can kind of get into a realm that formerly was only the world of the rich and famous, or the highly privileged, and then make a name for himself, even, and maybe in the case of the omnibus, especially if he can also become a divisive and ultimately controversial figure in his time. So he's a perfect example.
Yeah, he's definitely a rags to riches story. And he's not very well respected today. And it's not just because, he slandered this guy or he was plundering all this stuff. It's hilarious. You look at, he was at Christ College, Cambridge, and they have a page about him. And the first paragraph is, this is what he did, this is when he lived. And the second paragraph is, obviously, we disavow all of his methods. Obviously, it was a different time. Yeah. Obviously, you should not aspire to be like this person at all. And unfortunately, because he wrote so much so quickly, and he kind of never kept up with scholarship, even in his own time. Like, the translation methods had outstripped him by the time he died. So even though his this voluminous amount of work, it's just not very well respected. I have a 1911 Cook's Guidebook to Egypt and the Sudan by Budge. This was given to me by the person who sold me my house, my friend Jim Bell. There's everything in here from this is how you read the cartouches to these are where the good hotels are in Luxor. I mean, it's 900 pages of dense, fact-filled,
beautiful
stuff with pull-out maps and everything. So I love this
Fodor's
book.
Guide.
Yes, exactly. A Lonely Planet. So yeah.
So Rose, you did read a book of his that kind of charmed you? If our listeners were going to read one book, what would it be? You mentioned it already.
By Nile and by Tigris. It is public domain. You can find it on the Internet Archive. All of his books are still in print. If you want to try to read his Egyptian works, I don't necessarily recommend it. But the one that drove all the Orders of the Golden Dawn people wild was called Egyptian Magic. And that you can get a Kindle edition. I've seen it in old bookshops and everything. But his autobiography, it is dense at times, and he will go off in the weeds about like translation methods, which can be a bit difficult, but he pulls you back in with some witty little aside, and you're just like, I love to hate you. Yeah.
And that concludes E.A. Wallis Budge, entry 161.IS1901. Certificate number 43419 in the omnibus. Futurelings, I don't have to tell you, social media is an unholy trash fire, and we disavow it. Yet, we contribute to Facebook and Instagram at Omnibus Project. Fans of the show congregate on Reddit, Discord, and Facebook, and elsewhere under the group sobriquet Futurelings, and you can find them threaded throughout the internet under that search term. Our address for email was theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You can send physical mail, postcards, packages, locks of hair, stacks of hundreds to The Omnibus Project at 609 Southwest 150th Street, number 48084, Burien, Washington, 98166-998. Remember, our show is listener-supported, so please consider joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/omnibusproject. There you will find a treasure trove of photos and notes, outtakes and mail, and Ken Jennings being a goofball back in the old days, and monthly addenda episodes dating into the distant past. And levels of subscription with perks including exclusive merch items, many, many bonuses, early access to weekly episodes. It is more than worth your time and money to subscribe at patreon.com/omnibusproject.
Futurelings. From our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. If the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. If Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.